As a project manager, you quickly find out that all projects are not the same, but they all generally do follow the same 5 phases. These phases are very important to understand where you're at with the project. Sometimes you may be beginning with the project, and other times you may be ending with the project, but all projects follow 5 phases, and in this video, we're going to talk about those 5 phases. So what are the 5 phases of any project that you're going to have as a project manager? Well, the first one's kind of obvious, and that's the concept or the initiation of the project. Setting down and looking at the project for the first time. What is it that we're trying to resolve here? What is the problem that we're trying to resolve? In engineering, and especially in land development design, the initiation of a project comes to you is when a client calls you and says, "Hey, I have a project and I'm looking for a civil engineer." And that's usually where you start off on the initiation of a project. You start off asking some simple questions. Where's the project at? What type of project is it? What exactly do you need from the civil engineer? These are all the initial questions that you have about the project, which then leads into the second phase of the project. Once you gathered all the initial information about the project from the client, you now begin into the planning stage of the project. What are the steps necessary in order to complete the project? What resources you're going to need in order to finish this project? Can you do it all in-house, or will you need some third parties to help you out to complete the project? You begin to lay out a schedule of events that are going to happen and when certain milestones must be accomplished in order to end the project on the right date and on the right budget that the client wants. So let's say that you're trying to submit a set of grading plans into a county. The grading plans that the client's given you has to be done within 2 weeks. So you know in that time frame you have to get a soils report, you have to get a survey done, and then you have to have a design team capable of drawing the grading plan, and then all that you're coordinating and having the engineer at the end to stamp and sign the plans and then turn it over to the client so that he can then submit it over to the county for permitting. Much more complicated plans that require all kinds of reports, technical reports, resources of as-built plans, then eventually development plans have to be drawn up, or sometimes called improvement plans, and then all that has to be processed through your local entities. All that is a very complicated set of tasks that has to be done and coordinated together, and then to finish on the right date. So that is a planning process. Now, once you've laid out the plan and figured out where you're going to do everything and what resources you're going to have in order to finish that project, this leads you into the third phase, which is the launch or the execution of the project. So what is the execution of the project? Well, that's where you actually do the hands-on work of the project. This is where we're actually going to begin working and moving the various tasks and finally to the end where we deliver the product to the client. This includes that initially would be a kickoff meeting where you actually introduce the new project to your team, to everyone who will be involved with the project. And that will include your client also. And so that they can hear what's going on. This is the timeline we're going to be using. We're going to be following the following steps in order to hit the milestones. And these milestones will then lead us to the end date, which is when the client wants it so that he can then proceed on with his permitting process and eventually build the project. Or if you're in the field, it's a construction, when you actually can get the CFO to actually open up and bring in the actual occupants to the building. Now, once you've had that kickoff meeting and you're moving along quite well with the project, the next step or next phase is now you're going to move into the more easier part of project management, and that is to actually monitor the project. The fourth phase, which is monitoring the contract, making sure that you're staying on track, making sure that if there's any problems that are coming up or tasks that wasn't quite identified in the initial planning, that you go ahead and add those tasks and make sure that they don't affect the overall timeline. And if they do, then to make adjustments here and there so that you can stay on track and hit that end date as you anticipated. So that's monitoring the project. The fifth step and final step is now that you've gotten to the end of the project, you've delivered your deliverables to your client, now you're going to close out the project. This is probably one of those phases that many of us as engineers don't really do very much. We get to the end of the project and hey, we get our final payment and we're done. But that's really not what you should be doing. At the end, you should take a look at the project history and decide, did we do everything the best we could? Was there hiccups that were along the way that we could have avoided? Was there lessons learned that we had along the way? Did we learn that it's easier to do things electronically than it is to drive it over to somebody? Or is it easier to do a virtual meeting to actually have a real meeting? Or is it easier just to do all meetings, more of them on emails back and forth and texting back and forth? Or is it better to communicate through text messages? Or is it better to communicate through email systems? Whatever the criteria is that you're looking at, seeing if you can learn something to make it easier next time you have a project similar, to make the process easier so you can get to the end quicker. That's closing up the project. You want to make sure that you go through your accounting, make sure all the budget has been billed and that you can collect all the money that's due to you as part of the closing. Making sure that all the documents are in the project folder that may be astray on somebody's desk and that you can collect those and put those into your project folder and so you can archive the project. All these things are part of your closing of the project. So now there you have it. 5 steps. 5 steps. The initiation of the project, which is basically when the client calls you and says he has a project and you start asking questions. The next part is the planning phase, which is when you actually are writing your proposal and you're thinking it out, how you're going to do this project, using something like Microsoft Projects so you can get a Gantt chart, put the whole thing together so you get a schedule of the project, and when you have an estimated date of when you're going to complete the project. That's all part of planning. And then the third part is the actual execution of the project, which starts off with a kickoff meeting with your team and the client and anyone else that's going to be involved with the project. And so that way you can introduce it, say what's going to happen with this project, what resources you're going to be using, and what personnel are working on the project. And so the client gets familiar with everybody, and also your team is familiar with him. So then you proceed on with the project, and staying on the schedule is all part of the execution phase. The fourth phase is the monitoring of the project, making sure as you're progressing along that you're constantly writing reports, status reports, and letting the client and the team know that, hey, we're on track, we're staying on track, everything's going well, or, hey, we're a little bit behind on this particular line item, we need to step it up and get back on track, or we missed a task in the planning phase, we need to add that in, and that shouldn't affect the schedule, or does it affect the schedule? If it does, then how we can correct the timelines in order to stay on track. So that's all part of monitoring the project. And finally, the fifth phase is the close, which is actually where we sit down and take a look back and see what worked well and what didn't work so well, lessons learned. And so next time we do a project similar, we can look at that and say, okay, yep, we'll make sure we incorporate that this time, and our project will even be smoother the second time around. That's the 5 phases of project management. So I know you've gotten value out of this video. If you want more videos on project management, and especially for engineering companies, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel so you'll be notified when we upload more videos to the channel. Also, you'll notice over to the side here that we have another videos coming up that's also on project management and more skills and techniques that you can use to better improve your projects, your project management, your project engineering, and your engineering firm. So until the next video, keep on learning, keep on growing, and become a better project engineer and project manager.